All right. Sharon Dukett is an award-winning author who has been a computer programmer, project manager, and deputy director in state government. In her debut memoir, No Rules, Sharon writes about her journey of awakening to feminism and discovering her own strength after running away from home to join the hippies in 1971. Sharon lives in central Connecticut with her husband, within driving distance of her 3 children and 4 grandchildren. Welcome, Sharon. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Katie. It's really great to be here today at the Blackstone Library, although in my house, but I'm coming from the Blackstone Library, and thank you so much for sponsoring this event. Here it's kind of a cloudy, cool, typical Connecticut January day. It could be much worse. Of course, it could be snowing hard. So that's where we are today. Interesting about today's event on January 16th, 2021. The day I left home, which is where my book opens, was January 15th, 1971, exactly 50 years ago yesterday. So it's a interesting experience for me to be here talking about this and having published this book. That particular day, it was snowing. And it snowed for a good part of the trip all the way across country because it was the middle of January. And that's something that I remember about that day. I came to write this book over a period of years. I've had a number of people mention how there's a lot of detail and they wonder how I could remember all of that, especially at the age that I am now, which is significantly older than 16. And a lot of that had to do with how I began writing the book back in the early 80s, which was on a pad of lined paper, just writing out scenes. And then those scenes ended up going into a drawer. And probably 10 years after that, I had my first personal computer. And at that point, I pulled it out. I started taking those scenes and transmitting them onto the computer, onto floppy drives. And saving it there and started writing more. So a lot of these memories were still very fresh in my mind at that time. And those that were not that fresh in my mind, I've found that if I played music from that era, it would start to come back to me. And I know a lot of you have probably had the same experience where you'll listen to a song and that song puts you right back in that place that you were when you remembered hearing it the most. And it touches you very deeply. Along with that, one of the things I did, if anyone's interested, if you have a Spotify account, you can listen for free. I have a Spotify account with a playlist the same name as the book, No Rules. And in that account, I have all the songs that go along with the book that were either mentioned in the book or relate to, or songs that I heard during the time of the book. So you're welcome to listen to that if you wish. Once I started writing it again in the 90s, I was also taking a lot of classes during that time. I went to a number of writers' conferences. I took classes with different writers who were had a lot of interesting skills and helped me learn how to present the book in a much better light in terms of the quality of writing and so forth. So that was a process that took me many years to develop. So along with also writing the book, I was learning how to write. And the first draft I wrote until probably around about the year 2000. And at that time, and I also joined a writers group, which was really helpful for any of you that are writing. I found that getting feedback and giving feedback to others kind of teaches you a lot about the writing process and how to even examine your own work. And that was something that was really useful to me. So those were all a number of things that I did to improve my craft over the period of time that I was writing. Then in around the year 2000, I got very busy with my work. I had trained to be a project manager at that time. My workload got to be much heavier. My children were getting older, they were teenagers. I kind of put the whole thing aside for a while. And I picked it up again in 2017 when I retired, because that was one of my goals. When I didn't write for all those years, I would say, well, I'll get to it when I retire. It'll be my retirement project. And so I retired in June, and July went by, and I traveled and had fun, and August went by, and September went by, and October went by. And in the back of my mind, the whole time I'm saying, you keep saying you're going to work on that book, and you haven't done it yet. And I just felt like, how am I going to start this? Maybe I can't even write 20 years, 17 years later. It's been so long. So what I did was I searched online, and I found a couple of women who were teaching a memoir writing class. And one of them was the founder of the Memoir Writers Association of America. And another one was a publisher of She Writes Press. And she was also the former acquiring editor of memoir for Seal Press, which is a traditional press. So I signed up for that class, and the first thing that my mentor, who ended up being Brooke Warner from She Writes Press, did was she said, "How long is your book?" And I realized I had never counted. I had just written and written and written and written. And when I finally went through Word and figured out how many words I actually had in the book, which was easy to do now. By now they have the technology that adds up all the words and stuff, which they didn't have back there at the beginning. So it turned out I had 170,000 words, which was way too long for one book. So the ideal word count being somewhere between probably 80 and 90, and with 100,000 tops. So I had a lot of work to do to get this book down to being something that that I could publish and people could read. So there are many, many stories that got left out, predominantly because they didn't really contribute to the theme of the book, which I came to realize what my theme that I was really discussing in this book was my awakening to feminism, and my own strength. And as I wrote it, I came to see that all the various things that didn't go well in my life, or that pushed me to do other things, resulted from what I had experienced as a girl and as a woman, being told that I wasn't enough, or I couldn't do this, or I couldn't do that because I was a girl, because I was, a young woman. And then eventually coming to recognize the women's movement when it started happening. So in 1971, just to kind of put things in perspective, and a lot of you probably remember 1971 well, and some of you may not, but it was 1.5 years. January of 1971 was a year and a half after Woodstock. The Vietnam War was going strong. 8 months earlier, 4 students had been shot at Kent State. So there was a lot of turmoil going on in the country, and especially amongst youth, predominantly started because of the Vietnam War. And because of that, there was this kind of movement of wanting to get away from all of that traditional living, because people needed to live in a different way to get away from war. I was still pretty young, but all this was going on around me, and I wanted to be out there. I wanted to be part of that. I wanted to experience that movement that was happening. And also I felt that my life with my family, and in high school, where I was expected to graduate and get a job as a typist, maybe if I was really lucky, a secretary. And that was going to be the rest of my life. And then I would live with my parents until I got married and had children. And that to me just seemed like something that I didn't want. I did eventually get married and have children, but there was a lot of other things that happened before that. So, and because of all of that, I felt this driving need to leave, and I did. I was very fortunate that I had an older sister. She was 21 years old, and she wanted to get away too, because obviously she'd grown up in the same household as me, and had felt, a similar kind of repression. So the two of us left together, and the driver was my former boyfriend that I had broken up with, or he had broken up with me, I guess. not long before that, but he was eager to go because we were, my sister, I should say, was paying for the trip. So, but we needed him to drive because neither one of us had a driver's license. So with that, I'm going to read a passage from the opening chapter. It's actually the opening scene. And the opening scene takes place on that day, that January 15th. It actually doesn't say January 15th in the book. It says January 1971. And this occurred in South Windsor, Connecticut. If you're from Connecticut, you're probably familiar with the town. It's in kind of north central Connecticut. Chapter 1, January 1971, South Windsor, Connecticut. I slipped the floor-length dress I'd sewn from a purple Indian print bedspread over my head and pulled it down to cover the 2 pairs of long pants, 3 sweaters, and 4 pairs of underwear I'd put on moments before, then realized how huge my waist looked. If I didn't wear my coat to cover these clothes, my mother would realize something was wrong. I yanked my dress sleeves over all my other sleeves. If anything showed, I'd be screwed. While stuffing a pair of jeans and my fake suede jacket with a peace sign on the shoulder into a paper bag, I scanned the closet for my sandals. I'd need sandals in Southern California. I was certain it would be hot there, even in January. With my meager belongings stashed for my journey, I took a last brief look at my room, the room in which I'd spent 12 of my 16 years living in, and wondered how I could abandon all of my things. The FM radio that my parents had given me for Christmas 3 weeks earlier, the guitar I had begged for when I was 12, my notebooks full of poetry I'd written over the last 4 years. Above my twin-size bed was a poster I'd made with magic markers the previous spring, flowers and peace signs forming a border around large decorative letters that read, "War is not healthy for children and other living things." Don't get hung up on it, I coached myself. It's only stuff. I crammed my arms into the sleeves of my brown corduroy winter coat and could barely bend them. Grabbing the paper bag and my school books, I dashed toward the kitchen, knowing my mother was waiting there to say goodbye before I left for school. I took a deep breath. "You're wearing your new dress." She sounded suspicious. I avoided eye contact. "I didn't realize you'd finished making it." "Yeah, I finished it last night. I'm late for the bus. I have to go." I dove past her. "What's in that bag?" "Gym clothes," I shot back without turning around. "It's awful big for gym clothes. I've got to run, okay? Bye." I bolted out the side door and let it shut behind me, not looking back to see my mother for what might have been the last time in my life. But I couldn't think about that. If I did, I couldn't leave, and I had to leave. This was my only opportunity. I knew she was standing by the door, following me with her eyes, that worried frown cemented on her lined, sad face. While closing the chain link gate behind me at the end of our driveway, I recalled the dreams I'd had throughout my childhood when I tried to escape through this gate. I was always running with legs of lead that made me move in slow motion, trying desperately to run faster as long arms reached out to drag me back. I never knew what I was running from in those dreams, but I always awoke before escaping. I couldn't let that happen now. Dirty snow lined the road, remnants of yesterday's storm. I snickered at it. Sunny California, here I come, I thought. Only one last ride on the school bus. My heart raced, making me almost dizzy. So that's the end of the first scene in chapter 1. So I was off on this journey thinking that I knew everything that there was to know about the world because, I'd been around the block. I'd slept with my boyfriend. I had smoked pot. I'd even tried mescaline once. I was a worldly girl. And I was ready to join the hippies and be part of that movement. But I had a lot to learn, as you can well imagine. And so a lot of this book goes on to tell that story of what kinds of experiences I encountered along the way and many people that I met and all of that, and how that led me to the different places in my life. So beyond that initial trip to California where I ran away from home, I did travel to other places, have other experiences. I did go home in between a couple of times and then leave again. Eventually, I graduated from high school and went to live on a commune. It was during the time that I was living on the commune that I really became aware of the women's movement. By then, that was 1973. And the women's movement, I think, really came into its own probably around 1971 or 72. There was parts of it happening before then, but it was not as well publicized and as well known about. And of course, we didn't have the internet, so it took news a lot longer to travel back then. But by the time I went to the commune, Ms. Magazine had come out a few months earlier, and there was all kinds of different experiences that were going on as a result of that. The women's movement, to a certain degree, came out of the protests, or at least this was my understanding, came out of the war protests, because women were very involved in that along with the men. Of course, the men were the ones who were predominantly at risk of getting drafted. But the women did a lot of work in those movements. And as a result of that, they came to experience how activism could change things. I'm going to read another passage, and this doesn't really apply to women, but it does talk a little bit about what was going on around the protesting and so forth. This takes place later on. This takes place in April of 1971, a few months after I left home, with some different people that I knew by then. It was April 24th, the day of the San Francisco March for Peace, which was being held in coordination with a march that was happening in Washington, D.C. the same day. Joe, Rob, Ann, and I, Ann was my sister, had made the spontaneous decision to drive north so we could join in with thousands of others and experience the energy of that many caring people in one place, protesting the Vietnam War. This would be a historic event, the largest of its kind to be held in San Francisco. Joe had an additional agenda. His ex-wife Nancy and 4-year-old daughter lived nearby, and this was an opportunity for him to visit them. I stood next to Rob's black and yellow 54 Chevy truck, which he affectionately called the Bumblebee, and stared out between two mountains to the Pacific Ocean. I hadn't seen a sky that blue in months due to the smog in Venice, and the bright sun felt blinding. We slept on the side of the road in Mount Tamalpais State Park, Rob in a sleeping bag on the roof, Joe across the front seat, Ann and I sharing a mattress in the back. Now Joe was preparing breakfast on the 2-burner Coleman stove, steamy black coffee in one pan and hard-boiled eggs in the other. I wrapped myself in his poncho against the crisp morning air. A Volkswagen Beetle drove by, and the driver waved, as did a young woman riding up the side of a mountain on a 10-speed bicycle. See what I mean about this place? Joe threw his arms open. Isn't it great? People around here are like a bunch of little elves. They just appear out of the woods. This is the way it's supposed to be, not like that rat race back in LA. He poured me a cup of black coffee, and I wrapped my hands around it to warm them. Can you imagine my daughter growing up here? She'll be a little elf, just like them. When Ann emerged from the truck, she looked pasty and stared at the ground, looking up only to make a face that I recognized as meaning she felt terrible. On the drive there the day before, she had taken LSD for the first time, and she had tossed and turned all night. I could tell she regretted her impulsive decision, and I felt sorry that I had encouraged her. Ann had always been more cautious than me. Since leaving home, I knew she'd been feeling the weight of responsibility, while I allowed myself to blunder into each new experience without concern for the consequences. I never worried about buying groceries or paying rent. Ann took care of supporting me with her unemployment and savings. I also know that when she didn't feel well, she was stubborn and inconsolable. I didn't sleep at all. I think I'm going to throw up. She leaned against the truck. Maybe you need to eat something. Eggs, ugh, that'll make me feel even sicker. Is there a piece of bread around here? Joe found part of a loaf tucked under a jacket and handed the bag to Ann. I have to go home. There's no way I'm going to walk around San Francisco in a crowd of people feeling like this. She tore a piece of bread from a slice and stuffed it into her mouth. Oh, come on, be a sport. Rob walked over and put his arm around Ann to hug her. Fuck you. She threw up his arm and walked to the other side of the truck. What did I do? Rob shook his head at Joe and me. I shrugged. It's not your fault. She gets this way when she doesn't feel good. Joe stared at the ground, rubbing his beard for a moment before looking up. There's a bus station in Mill Valley. I bet she could get a bus back to LA from there. 2 hours later, I was waving goodbye to Anne at the bus station. It felt strange not having her with me while exploring a new place. It was the beginning of a split that would deepen with time. By the time the bus arrived, it was too late to get to the demonstration before they closed the roads. We'd been warned the city would be shut down once they did. So Joe, Rob, and I spent the rest of the morning meandering around Marin County, exploring Stinson Beach, Bolinas, and Mount Tamalpais. When we reached Nancy's house in San Anselmo late in the afternoon, we watched the news and learned that 150,000 or more people had marched down Gary Avenue. I was disappointed we hadn't been part of it. Nancy was pretty as I had expected, slender and feminine, with straight dark hair, nicely trimmed. She oozed confidence and sarcasm. She seemed not a woman beaten by divorce, but by one freed by it. I couldn't help comparing myself to her, an exercise that left me miserable. For one thing, she was at least 10 years older than me. I was still 16. I had nothing interesting to say or even a single enlightened statement to make. During my months in Venice, I'd gained weight from gorging on junk food after getting stoned. Now my clothes fit too snugly, and next to the svelte, delicate Nancy, I looked lover-like. Joe insisted we were cosmic sisters, but I felt like a cosmic klutz as I tried to be useful in the kitchen. As Nancy chopped salad, I did my best to cut through the carrots, but my knife kept slipping and I almost cut myself. She graciously asked if I could set the table as she took over the carrots. Meanwhile, their daughter hovered around Joe, climbing on and off his lap and making a fuss when he wasn't paying attention to her. Nancy rented the room she inhabited with their daughter from a man who worked for a music magazine. We spent hours listening to music I hadn't heard before from the demo copies he brought home from work. When the time came to go to bed, Joe suggested that he and I could sleep in the truck, but Nancy teased him, asking, "What's the matter, Joe? Can't handle two old ladies in the same house?" As a result, Joe insisted we sleep on the floor in the living room, right outside of where Nancy slept with her daughter, in a double bed behind a curtain. Rob slept on the other end of the living room on the couch. No one asked what I thought, and I felt unworthy of offering an opinion. I was extremely uncomfortable and barely spoke throughout our stay. I wished I could disappear. So that kind of gives you a taste of, some of the other parts of the book and some of the other experiences that happen, and what kind of, some of the people that I encountered that were interesting. The music magazine, which I didn't name the book, was Rolling Stone, and the guy who worked for it was a person who was fairly prominent in it at that time. Rolling Stone wasn't nearly as big as it is today. It was a much smaller music magazine, but still really well known. So that was still in the early days in Venice. And then there was also part of the book, I traveled across Canada, and there were many experiences that happened there, hitchhiking, and there's a number of other things that take place as well. So for the rest of the story, I guess you have to read the book. So one of the things I wanted to say is where you can buy the book. It's available on all the usual online places like Amazon and Barnes and Noble, and, bookshop.org. I don't know how many people are familiar with bookshop.org. If you're not, you should take a look at their website, because one of the things that bookshop.org is doing is they donate a portion of their proceeds to local bookstores, local independent bookstores. So especially now with bookstores struggling to stay in business, it helps them. And it's a significant amount of money that they do give to local bookstores. So you can buy the book there just like you could on Amazon, and you get to indicate which local bookstore you would like the proceeds to go to. So if you have a favorite one near you that either isn't open or you're not comfortable going there or whatever reason, or maybe in another city from where you live, you could donate. You could indicate that book to receive the money that's that's made from that. Locally, if you live along the shore near Branford, I looked yesterday, and RJ, Julia, and Madison indicated that they do have some copies available. So you can also buy the book from them. If they were to run out of copies, you could, they'll get it for you within a few days, and they'll either ship it to your house or you can go by and pick it up. I believe they'll bring it out to your car if you don't want to go in the store. So there's a number of options there. And pretty much any other bookstore near you can also get the book within a few days because it's available through Ingram Publishing Services, which distributes books, all books throughout the country. So that would be a good place. So ideally support your local independent bookstore in one way or another if you can. And okay, the last thing I want to mention is as far as writing that I've been doing. And then after that, we'll be going to questions. So make sure you go into the chat and ask any questions you want, and I'll be happy to talk about them. The next book that I'm writing. I've been busy with a reign of fiction now, and I think that it's a book that would appeal to the same audience that liked my memoir. And just to give you, I'll just give you a little overview, sort of a book jacket image of what this next book is going to be about. It's a thriller, and it's called, well, the working title, couldn't have a different title. The working title is Layers of Betrayal. In the United States, where a corrupt president and members of Congress declare climate science a fraud, successful businesswoman Anita Forrester witnesses her husband being dragged away as he protests on the steps of the Capitol in Washington, leaving no trace. Still reeling from the death of their son in a wildfire 2 years earlier and their marriage already collapsing, Anita must find and free him before he disappears forever. Her only lead is a list of email addresses he gave her. One on that list wants to kill her, and another is her long-ago lover who claims to know where her husband is detained. Who is behind this? As Anita uncovers the answers, it draws her closer to a powerful adversary. Who or what will Anita betray when faced with a decision she never imagined? And in this book, among other things, it's all focused around the suppression of alternative fuels and basically there's a technology which I've been following information about that is, I think, pretty interesting about photoelectrochemical water splitting, which is essentially you can take water molecules and use solar to split them, and then that makes energy. So basically you can make energy out of solar and water. And this is something that's actually being researched and studied now at some universities and stuff like that. But they haven't found a way to stabilize it or to make it available economically. So that's what I'm working on, and I hope to have that book completed by this summer, and then hopefully to get that out in the future to be published. If you'd like more information, you can follow me I'm on Facebook as Sharon Dukett author. I also have a website, which is SharonDuquette.com, all one word, until the .com part. But yeah, so that's pretty much it. And I'm ready to take questions now. So
great. Thank you so much, Sharon. So we have a few so far, and if there are any more after that, people, you can add them in the chat. First, we have a comment from Trudy. She just said that she created her own playlist from your book. So that's a fun thing. Kendra says she enjoyed your story and would like to know where your relationships are now with Jody, your sister Anne, and your parents.
Okay. My parents have both passed away. So, but I did become very close to my parents again after this whole experience, and I moved back to Connecticut. So I did spend a number of years knowing my parents and being close to them again. And my mother, as time went on, would always say, I never worry about you. I know you can take care of yourself. So that actually turned out quite well. And my sister's very private, so she's alive and well, and and so I don't talk about her, but we're still very close. And but she likes to maintain her privacy. Jody, unfortunately, also passed away a few years ago, and that breaks my heart. We did keep in touch over the years, up until then, off and on. And I'm still Facebook friends with her children, and she has a lot of grandchildren now, and that's all very exciting to watch. So, and I can also give information about many of the other characters if anybody wanted to know. So.
Well, there was a second part of that question that then said, what are your feelings now for Ernie's mother's warning?
Oh, like she was absolutely right on. Ernie, and I've actually reconnected with Ernie over Facebook, and just in a very sort of acquaintance kind of way. And he is a very right-wing conservative person. Actually, did right-wing conservative talk shows for a number of years. And so, but we don't talk about politics when we converse on Messenger. We just have talked about the experiences from the book, and he's read the book and he thought it was pretty accurate and thought it was well done. So.
Okay. Nancy would like to know, do you wish that you'd studied writing in college rather than computers, or did your choice of profession satisfy another side of your personality?
Well, at the time, I do wish I had studied more writing, and I did do a lot of studying of writing outside of that environment. I actually I did some college, but the computer studying I did was at a technical school. So it was a way for me to get a career in 6 months when I was unemployed. So I was able to do that, go to school for 6 months, get a diploma. At the time, they were very needed workers, like a lot. And so I was able to get into the computer industry pretty quickly and fortunately advance. And it was a good career. I enjoyed it. It was a good career for me. I enjoy writing too, obviously. But I think in terms of, being in computers was a very satisfying job for me over the years. And then, but I now have this opportunity to still have my writing career, and I'm very much enjoying that. So.
Okay. The Booths would like to know how long it took you to get to California, and how did you support yourself during the time you wrote about?
Okay, so it took us, I think, about 5 to 6 days because there was only one person driving, and he had to sleep at night. So, and plus he was driving through snowstorms quite a bit of the way. So when we hit, I did the navigation. We took Route 80 through a good part of the journey out there. And as we got to Colorado, I was looking at the map and said, well, the direct way is, to take this Route 70 that goes part of the way through Colorado, through the mountains. And then it shows that it's not built in a lot of sections, and, and it's snowing and it's January. So maybe we shouldn't go that way. And so I recommended that we turn at Denver and head south and into New Mexico and Arizona, which we did. In much more recent years, I've been to Colorado skiing several times. Sometimes when they closed Route 70, which is an interstate built all the way through because of tremendous snowstorms, and I know that was a huge good decision. And what was the second part of that again?
How did you support yourself during the time you wrote about?
Yes. Well, my sister had savings, and then she collected unemployment, and then she had food stamps. When I went to Boston, I had a job for a short while. I had various kinds of jobs here and there. Whenever I moved home with my parents, I would work part-time and try to save all my money for when I went places. When I got to the commune, so like going cross country, I had money saved. There wasn't a lot of money. I mean, I lived on very little money, and as most of us did that were, doing those kinds of things. You camp in the woods and you eat out of a can of Dinty Moore beef stew and stuff like that. It's pretty cheap when you do that, travel like that. So you don't need a lot of money. So up at the commune, a number of the people working there, the idea was that we shared money. So people did different activities. Some of us worked in the garden. Some of us, a couple of the people living there were making crafts. One person was making pottery and another one was making jewelry. And they went to craft fairs. I later designed some clothing and embroidered and stuff like that, took those to craft fairs. And there again, we weren't rich, but we had enough money to make our land payment every month, which was $150. And put gas in the clunker cars that one of the members was a mechanic and could keep running, and things like that. So
okay, go ahead.
Yeah.
So Nancy Wood also says, you begin talking about weight issues in the passage that you read, as you do later in the book. I wonder what you think about weight issues being a form of social control over women in our society.
Well, beauty in general, of which weight becomes part of that, I think is a control of women. One of the things, I did, I kind of went up and down in weight during the years of over the years of that time period. By the time I got to the commune, nobody cared because we were free women at that point. And you wanted to eat and in fact, being bigger was sometimes an advantage because you could stay warmer and you had, more strength and stuff like that. So, and by then I didn't shave my legs, which I didn't mention in the book, but yeah, I gave up, shaving the legs and all that kind of thing at some point along the way. So yeah, it's all part of, to me, weight, the weight issue is sort of a balance because there are there's health concerns involving weight, but that's not usually, if somebody's looking at you and saying, oh, you're the wrong weight. It's more out of an appearance because you don't fit the mold of what an attractive woman is supposed to look like, according to, magazines and all that kind of fashion and all that kind of thing. But of course, on the flip side, there are, health concerns that being heavier can cause, and want to take care of yourself and be as healthy as you can, then that's something to think about. But I don't think that's where that comes from when people are criticizing others about their weight. They're not criticizing you because they're worried about your health. So did that answer the question? If it didn't, let me know.
Nancy, are you good? You're welcome to unmute if you wanted to.
Hi, Sharon.
Hi.
How are you?
Good.
I typed out another question now. I was thinking that she might want me to ask it. Did you want me to ask that question?
Go for it.
Okay, so when I said, I really love the passage that you read when your sister went back to Venice Beach and suddenly you realized that you were on your own for the first time. Yeah. I kind of had that experience too when I traveled when I was a teen. And I wondered if you could maybe talk a little bit more about that sudden, like everything drops away and you have to be autonomous now, and how, if you could talk about how you felt about that a little bit more, or no.
Yeah, it was you know, I mean, we had spent times where, you know, we weren't together, and we were both living in Venice, and I had, you know, gone off and done something on my own, or she went off and did something on her own, but not that often. I mean, we did almost everything together. So, so now here I am in San Francisco, which is, you know, about almost 500 miles away from Venice, and with, you know, two people that I knew fairly well. But yeah, it was the thing that I felt the most at that point in time was more of, geez, what she's missing out on. You know, I'm getting to see all this stuff, and she's not, and that's unfortunate. So I kept thinking to myself, I've got to tell her about this. I've got to file all this away because she needs to know. But really what was happening was, it was the beginning of us. After that time, I drifted, you know, more and more towards this group of people. She kind of didn't. And it wasn't long after that that I left Venice entirely on my own and went to Boston, which didn't go well. If you read the book, if you haven't read the book, you'll find out. But yeah, it was difficult at times, and there were times when I felt very alone when I was on my own, and I didn't know how to deal with that very well. But over time, I learned, and I was still pretty young as well, so that didn't help. And there was still a lot that I had to learn about people. So.
Well, Joyce says that you are very courageous and wants to know if there were any specific times when you were frightened or questioned decisions you'd made.
Yes. So if you haven't read the book, which it sounds like you probably haven't because you would know, or perhaps you have read the book, but yes, there were definitely some difficult moments that I went through, and with things that happened that I was very frightened, and thought that they might not go well, and they didn't go as badly as I had expected, but it was still really shook me to the core for quite a long time. So, so I don't know. Do you want me to talk more about that at this point in time, or just let people read?
Oh, it's up to you. Let's see, that was going to be the last question. We have one more that came in. So if you feel like elaborating, you can, or we can skip to the next one.
We'll go to the next one.
Okay. Donna asked, since you were underage when you left, did your parents do anything to get you back?
Yes, they called the police, and it didn't take them too long to figure out, you know, nowadays I think they would have had me back in a day because it would have been easy for them to do that. Back then it was quite different. And that was actually one of the things when my daughter-in-law read the book, and her and my son talked about it, and they kept pointing out, saying things, wow, you could never get away with that nowadays. This would never happen, which is, I think, an interesting perspective for younger people, because, you know, there's technology and everything. It's so much easier to track people down unless they're really good at hiding, which we weren't at that point in time. But they did call the police, and the police did not find us. My parents eventually found us because we got in touch with someone that they had contacted, and they contacted everyone they could think of, all of our friends and people we knew, and said, have you heard from them? And they eventually got a letter from somebody telling them where we were, and they sent a certified letter looking for us. The police had advised that they said we could go and get them. They said, but if she runs away again, you may not find her the next time. So what they advised my parents to do was to try to establish contact and keep contact, and let us stay where we were until we were ready to come home, or until I was ready to come home. They basically told my sister, well, you're 21, you can do what you want, but, you know, these were the rules. So they let me stay as long as I kept in contact with them on a regular basis. So I had to call a few times I don't know, maybe once a week or something. That was expensive, but I had to write a lot of letters too and say how I was and what I was doing.
Does anybody have any other questions? I think that's it. I think we're good. Thank you so much for joining us today. Thank you, everybody who's on the call. It was such a pleasure to have you, Sharon.
Thank
And we
you.
look forward to your next book.
Okay. Yes, and if anybody thinks of anything later, feel free to email me, Sharon Dukett, author @gmail.com. All that information is also on my website. So if you go to my website, you can get all the contact information in one place, and it's in the book. So if you have the book, it's in the back. It's in the last page of the book. So if you think of more questions, feel free to ask. If you are in a book club and your book club reads my book, I'd be happy to come and speak with your book club. I enjoy doing that. Book clubs are a little more interactive, where you can talk to me and I can talk back to you. So because you have smaller groups typically. So that's another thing that I enjoy. So thank you all very much. I appreciate you coming today. And thank you.
All right. Thank you.
Okay.
Bye, everybody.